Welcome to this edition of Footprints in American History. Today we're going to talk about one of the most remarkable men of the 19th century, Frederick Douglass. He was a person that refused to take no. He was a man that fought for people's rights, but he also taught people to fight for their rights. Now, Frederick Douglass, just so you know, he wrote 3 autobiographies. He was the first black U.S. Marshal. He was also the most photographed American man of the 19th century. Now, considering when you look at Abraham Lincoln and so many other people from those days, that's very remarkable. Now, he was born a slave in 1818, February of 1818, on the eastern shore of Maryland. His mother was a slave named Harriet Bailey. She was a remarkable woman. He only met her a few times. She died when he was 7, but she was the only slave in that time period who was able to read in the entire county. And that is such a rare thing, to have a slave who was able to read. It was actually forbidden for slaves to be taught how to read, incidentally. Now, he never met his father. He grew up mostly on a plantation on the eastern shore of Maryland. His Aunt Betsy was the one who raised him. Now, when he was growing up, one of the things he learned was that there was a definite connection between having your freedom and being able to read. So he made a determination at a very young age that he was going to learn how to read. Now, he kind of split his time between 2 different slave masters. One was on the eastern shore, one was in Baltimore. He ended up getting sent to Baltimore. Now, during this time in Baltimore, his slave master's wife she was teaching her son how to read, but she was also on the side teaching Douglass to read at the same time. Now, the slave owner found out about that, had it out with her, and made it clear this is not going to happen, this was illegal, and he made it clear that she's not going to teach him anymore to read. So, Frederick Douglass made a decision. He's going to learn to read no matter what. So while he was in Baltimore, he started teaching himself to read. He was doing it through different ways. One was there was a lot of white kids in the neighborhoods, so he would give them bread. These were poor white kids, and they would teach him how to read through doing it. And he just kept working on it to the point where he was self-educating himself without any help. He was determined that he was going to learn to read, he was going to learn to be literate, he was going to learn how to obtain his freedom. He did not want to live in this lifestyle. And at the age of 12, he bought a book called The Columbian Orator. And it had speeches, debates, writings, and things like that about liberty and people's rights and things like that. And he was reading a book like this about liberty at the age of 12. Now, we're going to do an impromptu quiz here and just ask, okay, how many of you here in the audience were buying books about people's liberties and freedom at the age of 12? Okay, let's do a head count. Okay, looks like a few of you. Now, how many of you were begging your mom to take you to Burger King once the cartoons went off? Okay, probably most of you. So this just tells you the IQ this man had. Just how intelligent he was, just how much he wanted to get ahead. Now, at the age of 15, his slave owner sent him back to the eastern shore to work there as a field hand. During this time that he's back on the eastern shore having to do this work, which he was not wanting to do, he wanted to educate himself further, but he rebelled against this person behind his back. He was teaching other slaves how to read. He was teaching them a lot of things. He even was trying to plot an escape. Now, what happened was that while he was doing this, back then they had something called leasing slaves. It was a way slave owners could make extra money. So what happened was he leased it to a man who was considered a slave breaker. During his time with him, this guy was abusive, and because they called him a slave breaker, what it meant was he would physically just abuse them to the point that it would make them more compliant. And that was the goal with Frederick Douglass. By the way, he was born under a different name. Frederick Douglass ended up being the name that he adopted. So during this time, After a matter of months of having to live under this person that he was being leased to, the man attacked him. Well, Douglass wasn't going to take this. They ended up fighting for a full 2 hours. Frederick Douglass ended up winning the fight after 2 hours. The man did leave him alone after that. He did not try to fight him again, but eventually he got sent back to Baltimore to live again. During his time back in Baltimore, he met a free black lady named Anna Murray. Now, she was free, so she helped him escape, and he wanted to get his freedom at almost any cost. He got a train, he went to New York City, he dressed as a sailor and pretended to be a free man until he got to New York. Now, when he was there, he declared himself free. However, that did not mean that there were not going to be people looking for him. He was still pretty much a fugitive while he was in New York. Now, Anna did join him in New York. They ended up marrying. They adopted the last name Douglass. But they just felt because of the danger of being caught while he was in New York, they needed to get out, so they went to New Bedford, Massachusetts, and that was where they changed the last name. They ended up having 5 kids. Now, he had several jobs, working labor jobs, and he was treated so unfairly by these people. Between the wages and just the way they treated him, he was not receiving fair treatment whatsoever. So while he was there, people took note of his oratory skills. It started with an abolitionist meeting. He went to it, they asked him to speak, he went up there, and they noticed this man is a great speaker. He had great speaking skills. So he started getting asked more and more to publicly speak. He ended up working for the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, and they sent him speaking all across the northern states and across the Midwestern states. And a lot of people did not believe that he was even a former slave because he just came off so polished and so educated. And when he started speaking, and he was doing his autobiographies by this point, they realized, okay, the dates and the places match up. This man really was a former slave. They began realizing this. So they began listening to him that much more. However, that fear of being caught and being sent back to slavery still was with him. He was still with his wife. So he ended up going to England to live. He also ended up spending time in Scotland and Ireland, where he was doing a lot of public speaking. He did that for 2 years until some abolitionists in the United States bought his freedom, and he was able to come back to the United States, this time as a free man. Now, after he got back to the U.S., he began embracing women's rights. It wasn't just about the rights of the African American man, it was also about the rights of women. He began embracing this, and he began speaking on this just as much. But he also was helping the Underground Railroad to get former slaves from the southern states into the northern, helping them find a way to get to freedom. He bought his own printing press, and he started his own newspaper even. The newspaper was called the North Star, and he started challenging segregation in the northern states through this. He did not like seeing how his brothers and sisters were being treated in the northern states either. They may not have been slaves, but he definitely saw a lot of things that he considered wrong. Now, during the Civil War, he ended up working hard toward emancipation. He knew that if the Union won this, emancipation had to be a part of this, and he started working toward this. He even started recruiting African American men to start fighting in the United States Army alongside their white counterparts to help gain their freedom. And 2 of his sons actually served in the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. Now, the reason that's so famous is if you've ever seen the movie Glory, which had Matthew Broderick and it had Morgan Freeman and many other famous people in there, Denzel Washington, they served in that unit. And many of the other former slaves and African Americans went to fight in units like this during the Civil War because of his efforts. Now, they weren't getting fair treatment, they weren't getting this fair pay compared to the other soldiers in the U.S. Army, so he went to Washington, he met with Lincoln to discuss this. And he was definitely determined that once the war was over, he wanted his brothers and sisters to have equal citizenship under the law. So he kept fighting for this. Now, after the war, he and his wife ended up moving to Washington, D.C. He had a lot of prestigious jobs. He ended up working in federally appointed positions under 5 different presidents. So he did a lot of work for the black man, for women. He wanted to make sure that there was equality for all. He was way ahead of his time when you consider that it wasn't until the 1960s when we had Martin Luther King who was fighting for the same things, peacefully, both of them. Now, he kept speaking for racial equality and women's rights long after the Civil War. Now, in 1882, Anna had a stroke and she died. He ended up marrying another lady 2 years later named Helen Pitts. Now, his marriage to her was very controversial. She was white and she was 20 years younger than him. However, she was the daughter of an abolitionist, and so they remained married. And despite this controversy, he kept fighting for people's rights. Now, sadly, on February 20th, 1895, he was going to give a speech at a local church, but he had a heart attack and sadly he passed away from it. However, if you look at his legacy, the man proved a lot of white beliefs about slaves being able to be educated, that they didn't have the intellectual capacity. In my opinion, he may have been one of the highest IQ people of the 1800s, because of, if you just look at how much he worked to educate himself, if you look at just how much efforts he made fighting for people and teaching other people to fight. Frederick Douglass definitely was an American hero, and we need to recognize him as an American hero. In the meantime, I hope you guys liked the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and share the video if you can. Subscribe to the channel. Also, ring the bell if you want future notifications when videos are released. And also, don't forget to check out my other channel, Just a Bit Outside. If you go to Just a Bit Outside channel on YouTube, you'll find other videos that are not related to American history. They're more going to be other historical and just other things that I've done just because I felt like they were good for YouTube, so I wanted to do things besides just American history. In the meantime, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thanks so much for watching. Fair winds and following season.